Every village has its stories. Some are whispered from ear to ear, passed down like fragile heirlooms, their edges worn soft by time. In our village, surrounded by an ancient forest where the trees stand like towering sentinels, there is one story that has always haunted the minds of those who hear it. The tale of the Watcher in the Hollow. As children, we were warned to stay away from the woods after dark, to never venture near the hollow, that cursed clearing where the Watcher is said to dwell. But it wasn't just the words that scared us. It was the fear in the eyes of those who spoke of him. The Watcher, they said, was not a creature, nor was he a ghost. He was a presence, a thing that existed outside of time, a Watcher who could be anywhere and everywhere. He didn't need to move. He didn't need to chase. Once you saw him, once you knew he existed, he had already claimed you. The tale was simple enough. Those who wandered too far into the hollow never returned. But it wasn't until I ventured into the forest that I truly understood why the story was so terrifying. The first time I heard the story of the Watcher, I was just a child. It was an old tale, whispered among the villagers on stormy nights. My grandfather, once a strong and imposing man, would sit by the fire and recount the old stories. But his voice, though gravelly and firm, would falter when he came to the Watcher. "Don't go near the hollow," he would say, his gaze far away, as though seeing something only he could see. "It isn't the trees that'll get you, it's the Watcher. Once you see him, once he knows you see him, it's too late." As a child, I dismissed it. I thought it was just another of those old, superstitious stories meant to keep us in line. The kind of thing parents tell their children to prevent them from wandering too far. But I was wrong. It was a cold, moonless night when I first made my fateful decision to enter the woods. My feet carried me down the familiar path through the village, but the night had become more oppressive than I had anticipated. I had forgotten my coat at home, a small but crucial detail for the long walk back to my cottage. The evening had already stretched long, and my impatience tugged at me. I could have taken the road that wound around the edge of the forest, but it would have added an extra mile to my journey. It was the perfect opportunity for a shortcut, a quick dash through the woods, and then back to the warmth of home. I'd heard the stories, yes, and I had always dismissed them as nothing more than superstition. But in that moment, the thought of the long, cold detour made the woods seem harmless. My steps quickened as I veered off the path and into the dark expanse of trees. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt the air change, thickening around me. The forest was far darker than I had anticipated. An oppressive weight settled over me, pressing on my chest. The trees, towering and ancient, seemed to bend toward me, their twisted branches like skeletal fingers stretching out, hungry to ensnare me. The normal sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures were absent. The silence was unnerving, unnatural. I pushed on, my pace quickening as I focused on the idea of getting out of the woods. But the deeper I went, the more I felt the disquiet settle into my bones. The air felt wrong, as though the trees themselves were watching, listening. There was no breeze, only the crushing stillness. My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept walking. I had to make it home. As I reached the clearing, the hollow, something in my chest tightened. I had heard of this place in passing, but the description of it never quite matched the reality. It was barren, an emptiness in the middle of the forest, the ground cracked and scattered with dead leaves and withered branches. But there was more to it than that. The place felt wrong. The air was thick, as if the clearing itself absorbed sound, bending the space around it in unnatural ways. The shadows stretched longer than they should, twisting in impossible shapes. My eyes darted around, trying to make sense of it. There was no animal life, no movement, not even the normal murmur of insects. And then I saw him, the Watcher. At first, I thought he was just another shadow, perhaps a trick of the light or the trees, but no. He was there, standing motionless at the far edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the sparse moonlight. His figure was impossibly tall, unnaturally thin, as though his limbs had been stretched far too long to narrow. His presence distorted the space around him, warping the very air like a mirage. He didn't move, yet I could feel the intensity of his gaze on me, burning through the darkness. His face was a void, shrouded in shadow, but his eyes, those eyes, gleamed with a cold, otherworldly light. They were like twin pools of ice, endless, unfathomless, staring straight into my soul. I froze, a cold wave of dread washed over me, deeper than anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't the kind of fear you feel when you're in immediate danger. No, this was something different. This was wrong. The air itself seemed to tighten, the world warping around him. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I tried to turn, to flee, but my legs wouldn't move. My body felt like stone, heavy and unyielding. The more I struggled, the tighter the grip of the air around me seemed to become. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And then I heard it, a low hum, like a distant echo, vibrating deep in my chest. It was everywhere, all around me. And the trees, they were bending inward, closing in, the shadows darkening, the branches curling toward me like reaching hands. The watcher did not speak, he did not need to. His gaze was a silent command, and I felt it like a weight on my mind. My thoughts slowed, my body stilling as if some unseen force had taken hold of me. I wanted to scream, to beg for help, but my mouth was dry, my voice lost in the thick, oppressive silence. I was alone. I had always been alone, but now, in the presence of the watcher, there was no escape. The last thing I remember was the hum, growing louder, vibrating through every fiber of my being. And then darkness. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, the warmth of the morning a stark contrast to the cold sweat that clung to my skin. I staggered to the window, the sense of dread still clinging to me. And there, in the distance, I saw the forest, the hollow, as though it were waiting for me, waiting for someone. I told myself it had just been a nightmare, the terror of the forest, the watcher. It was nothing more than a figment of my overactive imagination. But deep inside, I knew the truth. The watcher had seen me, he had known me. And I could feel his presence now, not just in the woods, but everywhere. In the shadows, in the corners of my vision, in the back of my mind. The feeling didn't leave me. It followed me through the day, through my waking hours, and even when I slept, the dreams started. I would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, my body rigid with fear. The watcher's cold eyes were always there, following me through the dark. In the silence of the night, his presence pressed on me, suffocating me, until I woke in terror, my skin cold with sweat. It wasn't long before I started losing time. Hours slipped away without warning, moments that should have been ordinary, now erased from my memory. I would stand by the window, staring blankly at the forest, only to find that I had been there 4 hours, my mind a haze. My hands would tremble, my thoughts disjointed, like fragments of a forgotten dream. I began to notice subtle changes, things that I couldn't quite explain. My reflection in the mirror, for instance, started to look wrong. At first, it was just a flicker, a momentary shift in the angle of my face, a shadow in my eyes that wasn't mine. But over time, it became more pronounced. The eyes staring back at me weren't my own anymore. They were cold, distant, unblinking, like the watcher's. Their gaze, empty and infinite, was a mirror of something ancient, something that existed far beyond me. I stood there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. This couldn't be right. My face was still mine, but the eyes weren't. They were empty, devoid of warmth or humanity. It was like I was looking at someone else entirely, someone who had replaced me. My heart began to race, a cold panic flooding through my chest. No, I whispered aloud, my voice hoarse, but it felt distant, like a stranger's voice. No, This can't be happening. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I reached for the door, for the window, for anything that might snap me out of the nightmare. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with a suffocating pressure. I rushed to the door, desperate to flee, to escape the reality that had begun to crush me. But when I opened it, the world outside felt ... wrong. The air was still, unnaturally so, and the forest loomed in the distance, as if calling to me. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The reflection in the mirror, my reflection, wouldn't leave my mind. I could still see those eyes, those cold, empty eyes. I could feel them burning into me, into my soul. I could hear them in the back of my mind, a whisper that wasn't mine, a voice that was both foreign and familiar. "You've seen him," the voice murmured, barely a whisper, but it was there, inside my head. "Now, you are him." I shook my head violently, trying to block it out, to silence the voice that felt like it was crawling into my skin. No, I'm not him. I'm still me. I can still fight this. I can ... I can't be him. But the voice only grew louder, more insistent. It was inside me now, growing with every passing second, winding its tendrils through my thoughts. I tried to resist it, to hold on to whatever fragments of myself I had left, but the pull was too strong. The more I fought, the more it enveloped me, like a darkness I couldn't escape. "You're already him," the voice repeated, soothing yet cold. "You've always been him. The moment you saw him, you became him. There is no going back." I fell to my knees, my hands clutching my head, as though I could stop the transformation with sheer willpower. But it didn't work. It never worked. The Watcher's presence seeped deeper into me, wrapping around my thoughts, my memories, until they were no longer mine. The more I struggled, the less I recognized myself. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost in the silence. A strange, hollow emptiness filled me, as though I was slipping away. The anger bubbled up within me, a fierce, burning rage. How could this be happening? How could I become the thing I had feared? The thing I had fought against? I was angry at myself. I was angry at the Watcher. But most of all, I was angry at the truth that had become undeniable. "I won't be you," I spat, the words bitter and desperate. "I won't let you take me." But my voice faltered, weak against the weight of the truth. It was then that I felt it, the final shift. The last vestige of myself crumbled away, leaving behind only the cold, empty presence of the Watcher. My own eyes, those once warm, human eyes, felt like they no longer belonged to me. They were his now. And with that realization came the crushing certainty I had already become him. I stood, my hands trembling as I looked at the reflection. It was still me, but it wasn't. There was nothing left of the person I had been. Only the Watcher remained. The anger that had burned so brightly inside me began to fade, replaced by a cold acceptance. There was no point in fighting. There was no way out. This was who I was now, and there was nothing left to do but accept it. I stepped away from the mirror, my body moving without my conscious will. I felt detached, as though I were watching someone else, watching the Watcher as he moved through the house. I could hear the distant hum in my mind, the sound of something vast and infinite, pulling me deeper into its grasp. I stood by the window again, staring out at the dark expanse of the forest. The hollow was still there, waiting. The Watcher had always been there, and now, so was I. The time I had once known was slipping away, leaving behind only a void. The anger, the confusion, even the fear, it all faded into acceptance. The Watcher had claimed me, and there was no longer any resistance. I had become part of him, a silent, eternal observer, forever bound to the forest. I felt the last remnants of myself dissolve into the endless blackness. The Watcher no longer needed to speak, because I knew I was him. I had always been him, and now, as I stared into the depths of the hollow from my window, I knew what would come next. I would watch, I would always watch. Time lost its meaning, and I lost myself. The watcher had no past, no future, only the present, only the endless, eternal watching. And as I stood there, my reflection finally matching the cold emptiness in my chest, I accepted it. The watcher was me, and I was the watcher forever.